If I was in another space, I would just start a song to get you all ready. That is my that is my struggle credentials talking. But I will not do that. I will hold to protocol. Apparently, I'm being given, okay. In socialism, wonke sandleni zaba akuna muntu. Aibo. In socialism, wonke sandleni akuna muntu. Aibo. Aibo. Aya sababu. Amabusha. Nongxowa ngoba befuna. Aibo kusetshenzelwa ngabantu. Amandla. Okay, now we've started. Colleagues, good morning. My name is Mandi Satyanji. I'm from Oxfam South Africa. I'm the movement building manager. It is my honor and privilege to be with you and to be driving this very important conversation today. At the risk of messing up protocol, I want to acknowledge the Honorable MEC and her team. She shall be introduced properly, but I just want to acknowledge and thank you for your presence here, ma'am. I also want to acknowledge the team from Oxfam South Africa and our ED Nkateko Chauke. I want to also acknowledge the team from the Center for the Study of Race, Gender and Class and their leader, Prof. Ojo. And I also want to acknowledge the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation. We've been working with Mpumi from that organization, and I want to acknowledge her and the work that that whole team has put together to bring this very important event to life today. I know I am breathing a sigh of relief, and I think everyone in the team is relieved that this event is coming to life. And it comes to life at a very important point in South Africa, in Africa, as we anticipate the G20 Summit that happens in the African soil for the first time, and the last time for this cycle, according to the gurus of the G20. And it's happening in a continent that has been spoken of as the dark continent, the underprivileged, all the negative things that have been associated with our continent. And I think one of the things that I'm celebrating today is that while all the challenges are true, there's innovation, there's leadership, there's hope, there's possibility. And all of that is being driven by women. Black women at it. In, underprivileged communities, people who are breaking barriers really and are saying, we are here and we are here to begin to think about alternatives, right? Alternative policies that break barriers, that keep people, in the margins of the economy, in the margins of society, really. And I think this conversation today will begin to shine a light on the challenges that women, African women in the mining and agricultural value chains are facing. But it will not stop there, right? It will also say, but what are people doing on the ground? What innovations exist on the ground that we can shine a light on, that give us a hope to say an alternative system and way of doing things is possible. And that I think that is why I'm very excited today about the conversations we are going to have. I'm sorry for taking too much time, but yeah, that is me and my excitement. But let's get right into it, colleagues. I am going to invite my acting executive director, Nkateko Chauke, to come do a welcoming for us from Oxfam South Africa and really give us an idea of the purpose of the day. Why is it important that we are gathered here today? Nkateko, over to you. Please, a round of applause for Nkateko.
Wow, how can I top that off? Well, andizuyisusa ngengoma ke mna ke. But absheni dumelang sanibonani minjani. I come here today as an African young woman. I also come here realizing that as young people, black people in particular, in South Africa, we've come a long way in terms of recognizing our history, in terms of understanding our journey of transformation as a country. Yet today, 30 years into democracy, we are here still facing the same issues, particularly in terms of structural exclusion. And this is because inequality continues to be an issue that is looked at purely as an economic or technocratic issue. But we are gathered here today to look particularly at two sectors on the continent that essentially are most critical to our sustainable development and have been the most extractive, particularly for women and youth, and that is the mining sector and agriculture. Now, I stand also as a representative of Oxfam South Africa and the Oxfam Confederation. We see ourselves as a global movement of people who are steadfast in our conviction that business as usual is no longer acceptable and that inequality should be at the core and heart of conversations such as multilateral processes such as the G20. We have committed our time and effort to ensuring that we mobilize the G20 at different levels, at policy level as we are gathered here today, to come together and engage in conversations that pull together key policy positions about how we secure sustainable livelihoods for women in agriculture and mining. We also mobilize outside with communities by bringing the G20 to them to ensure that we gather the much needed priorities, lived realities that are supposed to inform policy making and multilateral processes. I also want to recognize here that this conversation is quite important as we sit here honored by the Honorable MEC of Agriculture and Rural Development, the head of department, but most importantly, comrades, scholars, activists, who put their time and day and effort into making sure that we are advancing these conversations in the context of the just energy transition to ensure that we are amplifying the importance of securing decent work for women, to also advance gender-responsive policy making that really centers sustainable livelihoods and prioritizes the participation of women in economic activity. And so as we look ahead to the G20, as we engage in our various platforms, both inside and outside engagements, we're also calling upon policymakers to really center the issues that will be surfacing throughout the day. I'd like to commend everyone who is here today, who have joined us in solidarity, but also in bringing your contributions to this very important discussion. The journey has only begun. The G20, I like to call it a moving circus. It comes to South Africa, and it goes somewhere else. But we need to be steadfast about what are the commitments that we want to leave behind for the South African government to then take forward, for the African Union to champion as we advance the priorities that we see here today. So Makabani, thank you so much for joining us today. And we look forward to engaging you throughout this time. And lovely to see so familiar faces as well as our partners in the room as well. Amandla Maibui.
Thank you so much, my leader, for those important remarks. I don't want to waste any more time. I want to invite Prof. Ojo to come to this stage and also welcome us on behalf of the center.
Thank you, my program director, Sambonani, Dumela, Kuyamora. Good morning. Distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, valued partners and friends, we welcome you on behalf of the University of Johannesburg into this important event which you are doing today. This event is held under the auspices of the Think Tank 20, which is the official engagement group of G20. And the T20 exists to advance evidence-based policy recommendations to shape the global agenda. Today, we affirm that this agenda must include the experiences, struggles, and agencies of African women who, despite deeply entrenched inequalities, continue to drive change within the extractive and the agricultural systems. We all know that mining and agric form the backbone of many African economies, right? So yet, the contributions of women in this sector remain undervalued, right? Undercompensated and underrepresented in key decision-making spaces. So from land dispossession to exploitative labor practices, and from environmental degradation to limited access to capital and markets. So women continue to face these compounding barriers, which we are all aware of, and yet across the continent, we witness women organizing for land rights. I was talking about that with Emil earlier on, pioneering sustainable farming activities, advocating for environmental justice, and demanding corporate accountability in extractive industry. So their work is not marginal, but it is very transformational. So today's dialogue is not merely academic, right? It's purposeful and urgent. It is designed to interrogate the systems that marginalize African women, while co-creating inclusive, actionable strategies that form national, regional, and global policy spaces, including those of the G20. Okay? So we explore the intersections of gender, of land, of labor, of natural resource governance, of climate justice, of agriculture, of economic inclusion, with the emphasis on centering African women's voices, experiences, and leadership. So whether you are joining us from the rural farming cooperatives, policy think tanks, universities, government institutions, development stakeholders, or civil society, we thank you for contributing to this necessary conversation. Your presence here signals a collective commitment to building a more equitable and sustainable future. Quickly, at the Institute of Pan-African Thought and Conversation, who are part of the pioneer for the T20 towards the G20. The Institute is deeply committed to advance the Pan-African dialogue, research and advocacy that connects Africa and its diaspora, and it's been part of the Institute in the University of Johannesburg since 2016. And similarly, the Center for the Study of Race, Gender and Class at the university remains a leader in innovative and intersectional research grounded in inequality, right? So together we are grounded in Africa, but globally connected, and the center employs multidisciplinary approaches to challenge dominant narratives and drive social impact through partnerships, teaching, and community engagement. Together with Oxfam Africa, we recognize that today's conversation is not the end, we hope so, but rather a step towards building stronger, more inclusive, and gender-just economy. As we begin today's dialogue, let us do so with clarity and purpose, courage in our convictions, and a willingness to learn from each other And may the exchanges that unfold today lead to meaningful, tangible outcomes that resonate far beyond this space into G20 policy frameworks, African Union discussions, and the lived realities of women whose labor sustain our economy. Thank you once again for being here. We all know the common adage, empower a woman, and you've empowered a nation. Thank you, MEC, for coming, and thank you, colleagues. We wish you a thought-provoking, collaborative, and action-oriented engagement. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. We appreciate those very important remarks. So at Oxfam South Africa, we always talk about how we partner with others to really challenge systems that perpetuate inequality and poverty. And I think just having listened to Nkateko and Prof. Ojo, this conversation begins to build into that ambition to say, how do we begin to build solidarity? How do we begin to challenge those systems that really entrench inequality and make it possible for inequality to thrive in Africa? A report that was published by Oxfam in Africa, we're Oxfam South Africa, part of a big global confederation. And there's Oxfam in Africa who commissioned a report really that looked into inequality in Africa. And there's statistics there, but there's one that really caught my attention, and it says that 4 richest men in the continent own over half of the world. So we have 750 million people in Africa, and those 4 men, their wealth is equal to over half of what that 750 people own. And those are men, right? And we're talking about how women contribute to making the economy what it is, making the economy what it is, but it doesn't benefit women, right? And the work and the contribution of women is always pushed to the margins. We talk about unpaid care work, we talk about unrecognized knowledge and contributions that the women have given to the economy, but they're getting nothing out of it. So we are going to talk about those today and say, how do we begin to challenge those systems? Without wasting any further time, I'm going to invite my colleague and comrade, Amir, to come to the stage and introduce to us the MEC who is going to provide a keynote address for this event today. A quick round of applause for Amir.
All right. Good morning. I must apologize for being the only male moderator for a discussion that is around women and women empowerment, but I will excuse myself in a matter of minutes, so you don't have to bear with me any longer. But good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here with us for this important dialogue on African women in mining and agriculture. It is truly an honor to see so many leaders, partners, academics, and community voices gathered in one room and virtually to shape how we can transform the 2 sectors that are not only the backbone of the continent's economies, but also a mirror of our deep inequalities. We know that across Africa, women produce the majority of food and hold communities together, yet they own less than the land they work. In mining, women continue to be underrepresented in decision-making while bearing the brunt of unsafe conditions and social risk, bringing these realities into spaces like the G20, realities into spaces like the G20 is not just overdue, but it is urgent. And this is why this conversation matters so much. It is therefore that our keynote today comes from someone who understands these challenges from both policy and community perspective, but who also brings the vision and leadership needed to drive change. Honorable MEC Vuyiswa Ramakgopa is a member of the Executive Council for Agriculture and Rural Development in Gauteng Province. She is also a sector lead for international relations within the Provincial Executive Council, and she is the national chairperson of Rise Mzansi, the political party she co-founded just 2 years ago. She's a leader whose career bridges politics and entrepreneurship and community development. From her early days in business and property investment, she has always championed economic transformation and women's voices at the forefront. Today, as MEC, she leads a portfolio that touches the heart of what we are here to discuss: how we tackle hunger, strengthen food systems, to build sustainable rural economies that work for everyone, especially women. On a personal note, I've had the privilege of working with Honorable Ramakgopa before, and I know her firsthand. And I know how deeply she cares about building a more equal South Africa and opening doors for women and young people across the country. Her energy, integrity, and dedication reminds me what bold leadership looks like. Colleagues and friends, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Honorable Ramakgopa.
Thank you so much, Amir, for that warm introduction. And thank you, Program Director, for not just for what you've already done, but for the work you will be doing, also taking us through this program for the remainder of the day. Dumelang, Sanbonani, Molweni, Absheni, Goeiemorgen, bonjour. And good morning to you all. It really is a privilege to be here and to be given an opportunity to share my thoughts on this very, very timely and very important conversation. Let me also get a few of the formalities out the way and recognize the ED, Nkateko Chauke. Thank you very much for hosting me and for inviting me here. Prof, I also would like to thank you as our gracious host as well. It is a pleasure to be here, Prof. Ojo. And to all the esteemed colleagues and distinguished guests present from civil society, from academia, my colleagues in government and in the business sector. It's always great to be in a room with people from different and diverse backgrounds, especially when discussing issues of this nature, because they require all of our participation and all of our involvement. So, you know, there are moments in history that demand that we pause and recognize their significance. And this is one of those moments. For the first time, the G20 Summit, which is the gathering of the world's largest economies and most powerful leaders, is being hosted on African soil. This is no small matter. And it matters not because the G20 is just another international meeting. The decisions that flow, or the decisions that take place and get taken in that forum, shape the flow of capital, the movement of trade, the allocation of resources, and influence policy across the globe. They determine which countries prosper and which countries remain on the margins. And this is why we cannot simply allow G20 to be remembered as but another event that took place in our country. It must be remembered as the moment where Africa stepped forward and actively worked to shape the agenda, to set the priorities, and ensure that the outcomes of this process serve the people of this continent, and of course, in this country. And it goes without saying that this should not just include only the powerful or the resourced. the gains of the decisions that are taken in this G20 must serve the people and must be felt equitably. And it is not South Africa's moment alone. This is Africa's moment. It is a moment where our farmers, our workers, our young people, our women resonate as strongly in the global halls of power as any other stakeholder in society. Now we know that often Africa is framed as the site of vulnerability and crisis, of climate crisis, systemic inequality, and economic precarity. But here in this room, we must assert a different truth. Africa is also a center of power, of knowledge, of feminist innovation. And we cannot afford to overlook everything that we have to offer. So this T20 dialogue is not a side conversation. The engagement groups of the G20 have been established in principle to be able to galvanize the broadest range of voices in society towards a common global agenda. And the role that this forum plays is therefore critical in bringing policymakers and thought leaders together in shaping some of the most critical policies that will drive the global agenda moving forward. This is where solutions must be crafted. And this is where the voices of those most affected by the issues that are being discussed at the G20 must be heard and they must be tabled. And so the matter that we are discussing here is probably one of the top agendas, I would say, probably top items on the agenda. Centering African women in the transformation of our key sectors of mining and agriculture. Mining and agriculture are the lifeblood of most African economies. Yet, as we know, they remain defined by exclusion and inequality. Women, as we know, especially in the agricultural sector, provide the labor that sustains these sectors. Yet too often, we remain without ownership, without voice, and without protection. This is not sustainable, and it isn't just. And so we must actively work to change that. So I wish to commend Oxfam South Africa, the Center for the Study of Race, Gender, and Class at the University of UJ, and the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation for convening this timely dialogue. Today, I want us to begin by asking a fundamental question. What does true transformation look like and mean to us? And what will it take to build the systems where African women are not peripheral, but are powerful, are leaders, are owners, and decision makers? And I've structured those questions in a very specific way, because we have to be able to get into the nuts and bolts. We've spoken for so long about, I think we're all on the same page here. We want to see women being advanced, we want to see women being represented and playing a bigger role. But what is it going to take to deal with the systems and structures that perpetuate the exclusion and the inequality that we all want to address? And that's an important and must be an important outcome of the deliberations today. So just as a means of setting the tone and framing perhaps what this problem actually looks like. So across the continent, women are the backbone of the agricultural economy and of agricultural systems. Over 70% of Africa's production is carried by women. Yet, they hold less than 20% of land titles continentally. Many women work in this sector as laborers without contracts, without security, and without access to credit and markets that would enable them to scale their enterprises. Women feed our communities and our households, but they are often the last to eat. They sustain economies, but are denied the fair share of the benefits. In mining, the inequalities are just as stark, if not worse. Women remain severely underrepresented in leadership and ownership, while being overexposed to the most dangerous conditions: hazardous work, displacement from ancestral lands, and gender-based violence in and around mining communities. Now, these are not just abstract reports. These are the lived experiences of women who toil in the fields, in the mines, and in the value chains that produce the wealth of nations. Yet it is these same women who seldom enjoy the dividends. Now, I will put it to you, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, that these patterns are not accidental. They are not a fate of nature. They are structural, and they are by design. They are the product of historic dispossession, of colonial legacies, of patriarchal economies, and extractive economic models that have for generations treated women as expendable, invisible, and more importantly, as free labor. This beloved capitalist system of ours relies on cheap labor for it to thrive. So at the point when slavery is outlawed and other forms of cheap labor become frowned upon, who is carrying that cost? We must ask that question, and we must call it what it is. These systems are deeply entrenched. They are written into laws that disadvantage women's ownership. They are baked into value chains that exclude women from participating in the economic gains and from in the decision making. And this is seen both in the corporate space, in the business and industry, as well as in the state, that rewards often these extractive practices. And the cost of this exclusion is, of course, immeasurable. When women are locked out of ownership and decision-making in mining, the benefits of mineral wealth flow outwards instead of inwards, instead of building resilient economies and sustainable communities. And when women's labor is undervalued, entire communities are locked into cycles of poverty, generational cycles of poverty. We must also recognize that these structural inequalities are being intensified by the great crisis of our time, which is the climate emergency. We are also experiencing heightened levels of economic instability, deepening inequality, and escalating global conflicts. These crises also do not exist in isolation. They are profoundly interconnected and built into the same dysfunctional systems. Climate shocks destroy crops and livelihoods, which in turn drive food insecurity and economic fragility. Economic instability erodes social safety nets, leaving families vulnerable when disaster strikes. Conflict displaces people from their homes and land, severing the very ties that sustain their survival. Each crisis just feeds into the next, creating a web of vulnerability that becomes impossible to escape. For women, particularly African women, in mining and in agriculture, the weight of these intersecting crises is heavier still. Women are the primary food producers and caregivers. yet have the least secure access to land, income, and resources. But we're not only here to catalogue the injustice. We are here because we know that collectively we can disrupt and reform these systems if we are organized and if we have a common agenda that we are all driving in our various spaces. If we are to change the trajectory of mining and agriculture in Africa, we must begin with a truth. We must declare, actually, in this room, that we are not powerless. We are not powerless. Too often, that narrative, the narrative about Africa and about women in particular, is that we are victims of systems that are beyond our control. But history teaches us the opposite. We have agency, and we must use it. We have collective power. Now it's about building that power, organizing ourselves for change. And when that power is organized, it directs and can create real, meaningful change, not just in this country, but in the continent as a whole. So what needs to be done to ensure that we actually start to move in a direction and build these economies where women are not simply present, but are powerful? Where knowledge and leadership and decisions rest in their hands and are for their benefit. Where they hold ownership over the land they cultivate, the mines they work in, and the resource that labor sustains. I would like to offer 3 possible, I don't want to call them solutions, but I'd like to offer 3 ideas for us to deliberate on throughout the course of today. The first and most urgent priority is to expedite land reform, but particularly to increase access to land and property ownership for women. And why do I say this? Obviously, I mean, I think we could all agree on that, but I think it's important to ground ourselves in the extent of the problem we are trying to solve. So looking at the state land lease and disposal policy, it has been documented that women, in terms of the state's land release and land reform program, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, it's been largely centered around land restitution. So there have been land claims that have been made, and some land would have then been restored to some land claimants. Now, in terms of the state's own land reform program, women made up only 30% of beneficiaries of the state land program. In terms of the hectares that they were allocated, women only account for 17%, 1/7, of the total space and hectares that have been allocated through the land release program. Now, this already is a highly problematic statistic and demonstrates, of course, the imbalance. But if you take it and look at it even broader in terms of our South African land ownership statistics, women in this country only own about 13% of farmland and farms in this country, and only 18% of private deeds registered land. So 13% farms, but the expanded statistic, if you look broadly at private ownership of land and property, it's 18%. Now, that is the number we need to fixate on. And in this generation, I don't even want to say lifetime, some of us are here for a long time. In this generation, in this next 10 years, that is the number that must move. We need to get parity on land ownership and property ownership in this country and on this continent. Which takes me to my second point, which is around access to finance. But what is it in particular about what finance, what access is being sought, and what should we really be focusing on? And I will posit that the first step that must be taken is to make financial institutions accountable for the share of credit that they disperse to women. There must be transparency and reporting around that number. So when I speak about access to finance, I'm talking about access to credit. Women who are either already in farming, who are already in business, or want to get into that space need to be able to access the necessary financial instruments and credit facilities that enable them to grow and expand and sustain themselves. That number currently is also a bit of it's a hard one to find, and we need clarity on what that number is. But I'll give you an overview, is that according to the Reserve Bank's own statistics, they don't do gender reporting, but 50% of every rand that the banks in South Africa lend go to mortgage finance, right? So home ownership is the starting point of getting on the ladder of property ownership. And in my past life, when I was heading up the South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners, a lot of the work that we did in this space was around exactly that, driving black ownership and women ownership of property. Because the first step is to get on the ladder or on the train. Before you want to get to the next stop, you got to be on the train. And getting on the train is recognizing that 50%, one of every rand that is lent, is going to a mortgage loan. And it's the cheapest credit that you can get currently. So, well, unless you obviously are able to access developmental financing, but it's the most accessible credit for a person like you or me. So I would encourage every woman today, if you are not yet a homeowner, can you put that on your vision board for 2026? 2026, we are buying property. I get it. 2026, we are becoming homeowners and landowners. I get it. Thank you. So that's number 2. The third element that is a little bit more of a long-term intervention, but equally as critical, is to reform the agricultural value chain for the purpose of small-scale farming. And I make this point again because we must recognize that, and this is where we stand right now, in South Africa as we stand now, 80% of agricultural output and value sits with large commercial farmers. So they are, on official record, just under 3,000 small-scale farmers in Gauteng, right? We don't even get to 10% of the output, all 3,000 of us. Now, and that is it's not an act of God. It is a design issue. Every step of the chain is designed around large-scale farming. So we have to start at the starting point to say, get on the ladder, own land. But number 2, you must then be able to access the seeds, the fertilizers, the support, and that will enable you to become sustainable in the long run. And a part of that, and one of the strategies that we are employing currently as GDAD is an aggregation strategy. It's as old as time. In the past, it was the producer cooperatives or farmer cooperatives. It's the same thing. Essentially, what we are saying is we have to be able to pool our efforts, our resources, and our produce, and create scale, even as small-scale farmers. As a single individual farmer, I can't take my 10 heads of cabbage to ShopRite. They won't want to talk to me. But if there are 200 of us, and we are able to sustain that offtake agreement on an ongoing basis, we can then have a much longer and much more sustainable relationship with that retailer. Secondly, also, there are also farmers who are big farmers themselves, who then have outgrower programs with smaller farmers. And we are very much in support of this, because it's about aggregation at the end of the day. So if there are big farmers in this room, I also want to talk to you. I want to know you, because we are converting many of our own farmers that we've supported into aggregators themselves, so that we can access the market easier. So these are some of the things that we are looking at. Now, I can't also not say one of the avenues that I personally am very interested in, and we hosted a session on this last year with the industry, was investing the industry of indigenous crops, and how we now start to also build new product lines that are more sustainable and that are grounded in indigenous knowledge and tastes and preferences. But again, it's a value chain. You have to be able to start at a seed level. And we're excited to see that there are already women farmers and people in the seed production space who are making investments into this industry. So we have to look for the new opportunities, but also game the current system and make sure that it works to the benefit of small farmers. Just as a bonus item, I know I said 3, but here's a bonus item. I think one of the things that we have to look at is around protections. Protection for informal business people. South Africa is defined, actually Africa, let me say, is defined by high levels of informality. But informality should not be synonymous with precarity. I think there's often a misconception that because something is formal, it must be formalized for it to exist in our minds. To be able to get insurance. I think we saw even during COVID, the entire fresh produce sector almost collapsed because 60% of our fresh produce industry is driven by informal traders who were suddenly told, you must now stay at home. The economy almost collapsed. And food insecurity was at an all-time high. Now we need to be able to think systemically, whether it's insurance, social protections, financial products, and other government programs without the requirement necessarily of formality. And that's also where I'm speaking to some of the entrepreneurs in the room. This is where innovation must meet policy and must meet regulation. And we must be able to design and develop these products that can respond to people. And we see a lot of this innovation already on the continent. Kenya has become quite a destination for technology, but it's not tech for the 0.05%. It's tech that responds to the real lived experience of the people on the ground. So I want us to also look and engage with the tech sector, the entrepreneurs in the room who can help innovate and find solutions around this. And the point that I'm making here is that all of this whole conversation should never be mistaken to be about charity. We are not here as women with begging bowls, asking to be included, asking for a handout, asking for charity. We are asking and demanding power, our rightful place at the table. We are demanding justice. And we are actually saying, as a fundamental condition of our collective progress as a country, as a continent, we must unlock the full potential of this continent by activating women and the participation of women. We know, and the evidence shows us, that where women lead, communities thrive. I often cite the Global Happiness Index. I'm sure some of you have seen this. But, I mean, year in and year out, the top 3 countries that feature on the Global Happiness Index are either led by women, or have recently been led by women, or have very clear and strong feminist agendas in their policies. Now, the data is there. We're not debating anymore. We now need to plan the roadmap and say, how do we get there? And across this continent, as I've said, women are already showing us what this transformation can look like. I know women who are currently building these climate resilient seed banks that I've spoken to you about. They are restoring degraded land, former mining communities where mines have actually left the area are now being restored and becoming thriving agricultural communities through the hands and the innovation and the labor of women. We are leading cooperatives and feeding these communities. Women in mining as well are pioneering safer, more ethical practices and leading many of these environmental rehabilitation projects. Now, these stories, unfortunately, they will not make the headlines, but they exist and they show us what is possible when we bring our heads together and when we work towards a common goal. And this is the vision that we must pursue. We must pursue, and I think this is the agenda and should be the agenda of G20, under the theme solidarity, equality, and sustainability. It's ultimately about saying we must move from extractive sectors that entrench patterns of inequality and invest our energy into regenerative economies and sustainable economies. And it's not only an African imperative, this is a global one. Mining and agriculture sit at the core of the world's food, energy, and climate systems. And if we fail to transform them, the Sustainable Development Goals will remain just that, goals. Perpetually in pursuit of these goals, but never attaining them. So this is the conversation I'm looking forward to us having today, and it's not a comfortable conversation, but it's an urgent one and an important one. So as I move to close, for those who've listened to politicians before, if a politician says, as I move to close, it means you've got another 60 minutes minimum. So I'll be kind, I'll give another 30 minutes. So as I move to close, I want to leave us and remind us that the transformation we are all seeking will not come from somewhere outside, other people somewhere. It will come from us. It has to come from us. Alice Walker, the author of The Color Purple, says the most common way that people give up power is by believing that they don't have any. We have to operate from a position of power and recognize, at the very least, the collective power that resides in this room. And for too long, Africa has been told to wait. Wait for investment, wait for reform, wait for permission. But we now know that no one is going to build this Africa for us that we envision. We must build it ourselves. And it must be led by the most credible and competent and ethical leaders in society. We must hold ourselves to that minimum standard. We must love ourselves enough to put forward leaders who represent our highest and best interests, so that we can be that generation that confronts once and for all these structural inequalities that hold women back from owning land, from influencing decisions, and from benefiting from our own labor. And we know that no progress, not in Africa, not anywhere in the world, has ever been handed over. Power is not given. It is demanded, it is taken. So we must do that. We must fight for it, and we must win. So this T20 dialogue gives us an opportunity to set that agenda. It gives us a mandate. It gives us a seat at the table and a voice in the room. It's an opportunity to shape a blueprint for transformation that is feminist, that is inclusive, and that is Pan-African. It's a chance for us to build those new systems that value women's leadership, that reward our labor and protect our rights. And it's a chance for us to show the world that Africa is not going to simply host global conversations. We will lead them. So let us seize this moment fully, and let us ensure that the voices in this room do not just end here, but they echo through the halls of the G20, through the African Union, through every institution that shapes our futures. And let us leave this gathering with a collective determination that cannot be ignored. Because we know that when women move, the whole community moves. So let us move with urgency. Let us move with clarity, and let us move together. Because when women rise, the world rises with us. I thank you. You're supposed to give me a hug.
Oh,
that's the protocol.
Yes. Fantastic. Thank you so much, MEC. Again, on a personal note, I had missed your inspirational talks behind any given podium. But I think there are four main points that we obviously need to take, and I'm looking forward to the 4 panel discussions throughout the day that would discuss perhaps the 4 ideas, 3+ bonus, 3+1 ideas that were put forward. The biggest question and the most urgent one, of course, being the land reform question. How do we do that in a way that also works for women, particularly to be able to participate in mining and agriculture more actively and as leaders, and not particularly as preferred candidates? Access to finance, very good point. I hope we can talk about also debt relief and things along those lines in those conversations as well. So it's not only about access to credit, but finally reforming the agricultural value chain. Fundamentally important, especially in a country that everything is so heavily monopolized by the big market. And the bonus idea, protection of informal business, or formalizing informal business if it is possible. So the next 4 panel discussions, let's keep those ideas in mind. Program Director, I know we are supposed to have a little break, if that's feasible, and potentially a photo op for the executive organizers, if that's also allowed. But I am not the decision maker, I'm going to disappear. Thank you.
Thank you, Amir. Thank you so much, MEC. That was powerful. Thank you. Yes, just as Amir said, I know that means we're running 15 minutes or so behind schedule. We will sort it out during the day. It's gonna all come together. Don't stress. But let's take a 15-minute break, and we will also take a photo on the stairs this way. We will be directed. Thank you, comrades. Let's take a break.